Leslie Orgel's second rule, that evolution is cleverer than you are, holds special salience for those of us who make wine in the mid-Atlantic region of the United States. 13 million years ago, when carbon dioxide levels were about 420 parts per million, that should be a familiar number to all of you listening to this webinar, temperatures were much higher, and where I'm sitting now was 130 feet below sea level. The transition to a more stable, human-friendly, in fact, allowing humans to flourish and us to make wine here in the region, was mediated in part by the coevolution of plants, C4 grasses, and ruminants. We're here today to explore how we can make use of this long-standing evolutionary symbiotic relationship in order to improve the climate, stabilize ecosystems, and improve our vineyard practices. I'm joined today for this webinar, sponsored by the Porto Protocol, by Johan Renneke of Renneke Wines, Ligia Santos, and Kelly Mulville. I'm Tom Krogan from the Vineyards at Doden in Davidsonville, Maryland. Before we start with the conversation, I want to introduce, for those of you who may be new to these climate talks, I want to introduce you to the Porto Protocol, an international collaboration of members of the wine industry who share the common goal of mitigating and adapting to climate change. Members from across the entire value chain of the wine industry have come together and share their experience and expertise, because as the Porto Protocol leadership likes to say, there is no competition when it comes to solving the climate challenge. Today I want to start, as I mentioned, this is an ancient evolutionary relationship between animals and plants. And in fact, it's a fairly old relationship in agricultural systems. In fact, Ligia, I want to start with you. Can you introduce your operation? Ligia's been using sheep in their vineyard for a very long time. Can you tell us about it and how it's going?
Sure. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, especially to Marta and Porto Protocol. It's been super useful to be part and to listen to all of these talks with very practical advices and a safe space to ask questions to very knowledgeable colleagues. Well, I'm just to make a disclaimer, Caminhos Cruzados is a very young company. We started in 2012, but I was born in the Down region. It's one of the oldest regions of wine producing in Portugal. We are in the center north of the country, close to a mountain called Serra da Estrela, it's Star Mountain. And it's a very old and traditional region where we grow vines for many generations, but we also make cheese, sheep cheese, a very specific cheese, one of the most famous in Portugal. And I'm guessing that this relationship between wine and cheese is very ancient and made possible that this collaboration between wine growers and sheep owners so ancient. We've been using sheep in Caminhos Cruzados since the very beginning. Also because my grandfather, who was a small farmer, had sheep, had vineyards, and like him, many other small wine producers in the region. We kept using them because we are fortunate to have Luis, who should be here talking about this, but his English is not so good. So he asked me, so I'm here on his behalf. He is the one in charge to look after our vineyards. And he also happens to be the third or fourth generation of cheese producing family. They produce that kind of particular cheese I was telling you about, made with milk of these kind of sheep. And they've been using the sheep in vineyards for a long time. And since we have been making wine in Caminhos Cruzados, we are lucky to have him as our partner, because he brings his flock every year to our vineyards. So it's a very it's a win-win relationship between us and his family, and we have been having wonderful results with the usage of the sheep.
So you've had sheep for a long time. Kelly at Piscinas has also had a long-standing experience with ruminants prior to establishing a vineyard. So like Leisha, he's been able to adapt and start from scratch to create a vineyard that is makes use of sheep. Kelly, can you tell us more about your operation?
Yes, I'm in Piscinas, California, which is on the Central Coast. And the vineyard that I'm working on has been designed specifically so that we can have sheep in the vineyard throughout the year. So we run sheep in the vineyard during the growing season as well as the dormant season. And I've been working on that concept for about 20 years. And I first got into that by setting up offset systems in existing vineyards so that we could graze throughout the growing season. And we discovered a lot of benefits by doing that, reduction in irrigation water use, an increase in yield, an increase in grape quality, and or a dramatic reduction in labor and outside inputs. So consequently, we decided at Piscinas Ranch to try and design a vineyard from the ground up that could be grazed at any time of the year. And so we've been doing that. The vineyard was planted in 2017, and we have been grazing that for the past 3 years during both the dormant season and the growing season. We are experiencing a pretty severe drought right now, so we don't have as much forage as we typically do, but we're still able to graze. And the benefits of that have been numerous to this point. It's we don't have to set up the modified system, offset system, in order to graze. And having the vines taller makes them both cooler in the summer and less prone to frost in the spring. The picking, the harvesting is easier, and we provide shade both for the soil and the workers in the vineyard and the sheep. So overall, this system has been working very well for us. We've increased our plant diversity, our insect diversity, our soil health, our soil carbon, and the fruit quality has been very good. So at this point, we're still young into this, but we're very happy with having devoted the time and effort to design a system that can be grazed at any time and feel that we're just at the tip of what the potential is for this going forward. But at this point, things are looking very good. We've just had our second crop, and in spite of the drought, things are doing very well. And so we hope that if we get rain again, that it will even improve from that.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting and very interesting. I know the audience will have tons of questions about how you've set up your trellising system, how the new vines do particularly. I know I personally am interested in that because we just planted several acres. But let me go to Johan first. Animals in vineyards is a huge topic. We won't even touch upon avian species like hawks and bats, but Johan has a different ruminant in his vineyard, and I wonder if you can tell us about that, please.
Sure, Tom. Thanks for having me, and hello to everyone out there. I'm sitting here on the bottom tip of Africa, South Africa, in the Western Cape, the town of Stellenbosch. There's some birds going crazy in the background. I don't know if you can hear them. Anyway, apologize for them. As happy as I am to be here. I'm situated on a granite outcrop, and I look towards the town of Stellenbosch on my one side and False Bay, Indian Ocean on the other. And I came to this farm many years ago as a student, and I started working in the vineyards basically to earn pocket money as a student. I studied environmental ethics, and what I was reading and my experience as a farm worker convinced me to try and farm in what I think is today understood as regenerative agriculture. We certified organic and biodynamic, and we use different kinds of animals in our vineyards. We have a herd of Nguni cows. They are indigenous to Africa. They're absolutely beautiful. They've got long horns and they look like they've been splashed with paint. And then we also make extensive use of chickens and ducks for different reasons. The cows we primarily use to help build soil, in particular to increase soil humus levels, because the area where we live, the soils are really old. They're very old, decomposed and weathered granite hills, and they're low in humus. And there's a correlation between soil health and plant health, a positive one, or in particular between humus levels in the soil and the resilience of the plants that live there. And the cows play a vital role in our vineyards, in building our soil carbon and making our vines grow better as well.
So, Johan, did the cows come first or did the vineyard come first?
Sounds like a chicken and an egg scenario. The vineyards came first. What happened, Tom, is we had so if you go to a conventional vineyard in Europe or in the States, I think you're going to sit with humus levels between 2 and 3%. What Geisenheim University told me, that's not a South African university, as I'm sure you guys know, it's one based in Germany, is that if you can build your humus levels up to 5%, the vines that live there, their resilience increased by as much as 300%. So what we did actually is we just grew grains and things with a lot of organic matter, and we would then inoculate with microbes to convert that organic matter and to build soil humus. Then it was suggested to me to introduce cows into the program, because on the continent on where I live, and I'm sure it must be similar on yours as well, animals play a vital role in building and maintaining soil health. And what essentially happens is in Africa, where I come from, you have large herds of herbivores, and when they graze naturally, they have to stick in a herd. They're kind of bunched by the predators. So if they would sprawl across the veld, they would be easy pickings, but their safety lies in the herd. And what happens if you visualize this is they walk across the ground as a herd. They eat everything in front of them, they trample on everything, and then they defecate and urinate on everything. And below the soil, you then have this die-off of the roots of all of these plants. And in the manure comes all the microbes that then move into the soil and then convert all this organic matter into humus, and that improves the carrying capacity. So what we try and do is what is known as biomimicry also. We can't really bring herds of wild animals onto our farm or wild predators like lions and things like that. So we have cows, and then the predators would be a tractor battery and a little electrical wire. And we then do what is known as high density grazing. So in the dormant months, in the winter months, which now for us would be, let's say, April, May through September, which is your summer months, we start on one side of the farm and we graze our cows in our vineyards, and then we move them across the hill to the other side of the farm. And once we've completed the cycle, we start again and we repeat. And the first year we did it, we could do this twice in the season. Now we're at the stage where we can do it about 5 times. So the soil humus levels have increased significantly. In some areas, they've gone from 0.5 and 0.7 to about 4.3. Those are the areas that we've been farming organically now for 20 plus years. In other areas, not so much so, but it definitely builds soil fertility, humus levels. And then a nice aside is I used to have to buy a lot of fertilizer to keep the farm going. When I started farming organically, I had to invest in buying organic fertilizer. These days, I don't buy anything. On the contrary, I just sell off an equivalent amount of oxen and heifers every year. So it's also been good from a farm cash flow point of view, and also a diversity of our income stream as farmers here on the southern tip of Africa.
So before we move on, let me just ask if you have calculated the amount of carbon dioxide sequestration, because about 60% of that soil organic matter increase of 3+% is soil organic carbon. That's a lot of carbon.
Tom, it's a lot of carbon. Our farming itself is carbon negative. We're actually sequestrating carbon. I feel very proud of that, because I was told that modern agriculture is one of the 5 biggest contributors to global warming. But if you can change things around and perform regenerative agriculture, like everyone on this panel is doing, it becomes a very effective tool to use farming for the greater good, to sequestrate carbon on behalf of everyone else. So that is it's a real positive. On the negative side, we were called out 2 years ago about bottle weights and how they contribute to carbon footprint as well. So sustainability, unfortunately, doesn't stop at the farm gate. It goes throughout the value chain. And at the moment, we're busy looking at bottle weights. We're looking at alternative packaging, using lighter bottles, and trying to find creative ways to offset our total carbon footprint as well.
Yes, and let me just mention that one of the projects that the Porto Protocol is taking on has to do with that packaging weight and the amount of carbon, and especially in glass bottles. There's lots of good information on the website, both written and prior climate talks. And let me just also say that if anybody has something to add, I hope that you will sign up and commit, like all of us, to sharing your knowledge and experience. Leisha, how did you all prepare your vineyard and to mix it with sheep? The sheep
Well,
came
Tom,
before the vineyard, right?
yeah, well, definitely the sheep came before the vineyard, and unfortunately, I didn't know the way that Kelly will certainly talk, the way that he planted his vineyard. So we didn't prepare. We planted the vineyard. Well, some of them were older, but even the younger vineyards, we planted them in a very traditional way, because we were, like I said, using sheep for a long time, but only during that period between, say, November to March. I don't know any other producer in our region, at least, that uses sheep throughout the year. So for us, it wasn't even a real chance to do that. So we didn't actually prepare. The only thing that we knew, and we reached to Louis' family, was to have all the conditions for the sheep and the shepherd, because in Portugal, well, at least in the down region, we still have shepherds with the flocks. So we don't use the electrical fencing. So the only thing we had to adjust was that.
Okay, so you're using a very traditional old world style of grazing. You have herding dogs, you have protection dogs?
Yes, exactly. So he comes every morning, very early in the morning, with the flock, and they are around 150 sheep, and they come together with 3 shepherd dogs, a specific breed, also very typical from that region, and they go back by the end of the day. They do this every day for 3 to 4 months. We have we have 2 employees that every day will help stopping the traffic so that the sheep can cross the street and get into the farm. But yes, it's a very traditional and old-fashioned way of making things.
That's wonderful. I have to say that one of the great joys, and also one of the essential tools, members of our team actually, is our border collie and our Great Pyrenees, who lives with the sheep. So Kelly, I know we're all really excited to hear about how you're grazing, particularly during the growing season. I know that there have been a lot of false starts, including some here at Doden, with regard to training sheep to try to keep them from eating grapevines and grapes. Can you tell us about your operation and how that's working?
So I've been involved a little bit with the training that happens with sheep and the aversion training, and have heard other people's experiences with using the masks that go over sheep that only open up when they have their head down. And so I wasn't actually interested in any of those techniques because of the problems I've heard with those. And it seemed like the simplest thing to do would just be to raise the vines up higher. And the total ranch is fairly large. It's about 7,600 acres. And we do have some cropland on there as well. But so the amount of acreage devoted to vineyards is much smaller than the amount devoted to rangeland. So consequently, we've run as many as 1,700 sheep in the vineyard in 25 acres. And that was for a very short time, for about 24 hours. And we did that just through herding, because we have several shepherds that are both on horseback and have dogs, border collies. And then also we've done it at much smaller populations of sheep, where we might say have 200 or so, and we will do a higher stock density and graze them for a short period of time that may take us 10 days to go through the entire vineyard that way. And so like probably everybody else on this panel, we're working to keep the animals bunched up tightly, mimicking nature, and keeping the density and the impact of the animals on the landscape is going to be very different at a higher density than when the animals are scattered about. And one of the things that is happening is that the dung and urine is getting deposited more evenly over the vineyard or the landscape, depending on where they graze. And the other thing in our particular case is that the animals have direct contact with the vines. So they're doing the suckering for us, and they're also doing the shoot tipping. And that the effect of that we're noticing right away is we're reducing the amount of labor, because that doesn't have to be done by hand or by machine. And so we don't have any need for fossil fuels for doing those tasks. And the other thing that's happening is we are seeing a boost in vine health based on the Brix levels. And in the areas where we are browsing the sheep during the growing season, we're seeing our Brix levels get as high as 22. If your Brix is above 15, then your vines are basically immune to sucking and chewing insects. They can't digest grape leaves when their Brix is that high. And so we are seeing that when the sheep are browsing vines, that the Brix is going up. And so that has been very beneficial. And that's just one of the few benefits that we've seen in carefully managing those animals when they're in the vineyard. Some of the worst damage I've ever seen in a vineyard has also been from grazing animals, but they were not managed like in the way that all of us on this panel are talking about. They were just put in and left there for months. And so that's a prescription for really reducing the health of your ecosystem rather than increasing it.
Yeah, right. So when you say Brix levels, you're talking about Brix of the crushed leaf.
We are talking about, yes. So we're talking about the sap rather than the fruit.
Sure, right. Okay, the sap. Leisha or Johan, do you measure the Brix levels of either the ground cover, the cover crop, or the I'd forgotten about that trick personally.
So we do as well. And I mean, I can only agree with Kelly. It absolutely makes a huge difference. We've got another interesting thing that we use, although it's not really animals, it's fungus. So one of the problems we have with viticulture here is downy mildew. And in organic viticulture, some people advocate that one uses copper rather than systemic sprays. The challenge with that is that copper is a metal, and if you're going to repeatedly spray it across your vines, it will eventually start building up in your soils, or it can at least, and it can become a self-refuting exercise where you eventually start killing off the life that you're trying to foster. And one of the professors or doctors at the University of Stellenbosch, I asked him one day, and I said to him, we use ducks, for example, on our farm to hunt snails because our soils were acidic, and one would add a bit of lime, and with the lime came snail eggs, and before we knew it, we had a gazillion snails on the farm. So like ducks eat snails, what eats downy mildew? And he said there's a fungus called trichodermia. And like a cow gives you manure, trichodermia gives you metabolite, and if you spray this metabolite on your leaves, it also increases the Brix levels relatively quickly to above 16%. And like Kelly said, yes, with sucking insects, it plays a huge role, but we've also found it to be very beneficial in terms of managing downy mildew pressure. One of the questions that I saw pop up was about the financial viability of using animals on a small establishment. And I think for us, there are kind of two benefits. The one would be production costs and the savings, and the other one would be the concept of waste on a farm. So what we found was, in the country where I live, our currency is called the South African rand. It's a very weak currency. It's probably I'd probably need about 20 rands for each of your euros or dollars that you guys have in your wallets. And unfortunately, a lot of modern agriculture production inputs is owned by a few multinational corporations. They're not really interested in earning rands for their products. So our inflation has been slipping over the years, about 6% per annum over the last 100 years on average. And it's been increasingly difficult for farmers, especially small farmers, to stay in the game. And what happens is that people then go and have to go for an economy of scale to survive. And they can survive for a period of time, and then the farms have to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the small farmer tends to fall out the bus eventually. But what we've found with this type of animal or cow husbandry with the viticulture is that it saved us in South African rands. I used to pay 100,000 rands. So that's, you can do the math in terms of dollars and euros, between 100 and 150,000 rands of fertilizer, and then eventually 100 or 150,000 rand of organic fertilizer. And these days, we don't have to buy anything. In fact, we sell 100 to 150,000 rands of oxen and heifers a year. So the net benefit has been tremendous. We've gained it in income, and we've saved it on production costs. Where waste comes in, it's an interesting concept. We make wine here on the farm, and at harvest time we have the small mountain of pips and stems and skins at the wine cellar. And you can't just go and dump it somewhere on your farm because it'll acidify the soil. It's really not good for the soil health. The same problem if you farm with cows. I mean, we've got about 50 head of cattle on the farm, and they leave quite a bit of manure in the area where we corral them, I think is the right term. I'm actually Afrikaans speaking, so I'm not quite sure what the English words would be. But the place where they sleep at night, there's a big buildup of manure there as well, and then the nitrogen levels can become very high. But the moment you create a synergy between these two systems, the problem disappears, because now you take all the waste from the animals and you can put that in the vineyards, and you can take all the waste from the wine cellar and feed that back to the cows again. The timing is perfect because the driest time of the year is just after harvest. There's no green stuff for the animals to graze on the farm, really. And they love a bit of greenness. And then they love to snack on some pips and some stems and some skins as well. So yeah, it's been hugely beneficial from both a production point of view or savings, and then also from a waste management point of view on the farm.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example of a circular economy. Lisa,
Can
you
I-
were going to comment.
Yeah, I was about to add something to what Johan was saying. We have the same experience here because, like I said, we don't own the flock, so the flock comes in and goes every day. But because Luis, our employee, is also from the cheese making family, we started to wonder in how many ways we could help each other. So thinking about the sheep, and like Johan was saying, and I also don't know the word in English, but the sheep need to sleep in this kind of leaves bed, right? So where they sleep, and it has to be changed with some frequency. And because in our property we have obviously vineyards, but we also have a lot of woods, and so we switched the remains of the pruning of the vineyards and these woods. We changed for some manure. So we were making a compost that we'll be applying at the vineyards now, starting in December. So we were giving him something that he needed to make the beds for the sheep, and in return he would give us something that we needed to improve the quality of our soil. So it's not only while they're staying in the vineyards they are helping us, but throughout the year we can help each other.
So this reciprocal relationship between the vintners, the viticulturalists, the ecosystem, and the animals is really helpful, I think, in all of our experiences. We've been talking about that, but having a sheep operation, having a cow operation comes with costs. We have to have veterinarians, we have to breed, we have to get fencing and that kind of stuff. Kelly, can you talk about some of the costs that are involved in having this dual operation, if I can?
So the interesting thing about this is they each have their costs, and by having sheep in the vineyard, really at any time of the year, but for us, especially because we can now graze them during the growing season, what that means for us is that we have a dramatic decrease in costs of producing the grapevines. And so in addition, we also have, we're stacking enterprises. So we have a sheep operation in combination with a vineyard. So having those two, the synergy between those two and being able to offset costs of both those is pretty significant. From my initial research when I was just modifying vineyards, and this was about 12 years ago or so, but the savings from that varied from $500 to $1,000 per acre. And I would say as time goes forward, the costs are just going to continually rise, regardless of where you are, because resources are declining. And so taking this approach of integrating animals into a cropping system like grapevines, it can also be done with all kinds of with fruit trees and many other cropping practices that takes that puts together the natural nutrient cycling that occurs in nature, as Johan was talking about biomimicry. So what we're doing is we're creating fertility on site, and using the most inexpensive energy source available to us, which is the sun. And it's interesting that sunlight is probably the most wasted energy form on the planet, and primarily in agriculture, because there is so much bare ground. And by integrating animals, you need to have something for them to eat. So we are actively working towards keeping ground cover in the vineyard throughout the year, because that allows us to have something for them to eat. And so again, that is basically creating a food from sunlight and healthy soil. And so as each year passes, our inputs are going down, and sometimes pretty significantly. Our labor needs are going down. And as we're getting better at marketing sheep, which is a little bit tough in this country because unfortunately people don't realize how good sheep meat can be. And so, and I mean, I just, when I hear the story of the using milk sheep in vineyards, that just makes me think how that's another brilliant angle for this, that you could potentially be producing three things: sheep for meat, for milk, and wine grapes. So I think there's the only limit in this realm of reducing costs, increasing profitability, is our own creativity, and combining that with the natural intelligence of nature. So there's tremendous opportunities.
Absolutely. Kelly, are you planting forage crops within the vineyard? Are you adding oats or grasses or other forage, alfalfa?
So that was part of our development process, was using cover crops, and that dramatically increased the carrying capacity. But so our organic matter went up 1% before we even got our first crop off the vines, and I attribute that a lot to the grazing practices and using the cover crop. But going forward, we don't want to create too much fertility actually in the vineyard, but we want the vines to match, to express the fertility in the vineyard and fill the trellis system in a way that seems balanced. And so we're striving for a balance there. And one of the things that's very important to us is biodiversity. And so as I'm moving forward in this, I'm actually backing off on our cover crop seeds, and oats were a big part of that. And we always were using a diverse cover crop. But as we go forward, we're seeing a lot of the native plants coming back in, and we are excited about encouraging those and creating this balance of what this particular ecosystem wants to express and how we manage for that. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why we've had such a dramatic increase in insects and birds and insect-eating birds in the vineyard. So so to answer, we did start out using cover crops. We still use them in small numbers occasionally, but in general, we're relying on our management practices to increase the plant biodiversity.
Johan, you're also in a dry area. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. I think, every farm is different, and every vineyard is different, and every corner of the world is different. Our biggest challenge, as I mentioned earlier, was that our soils are really old. They're probably some of the oldest soils you can find anywhere in the world in terms of how, where vineyards are grown. So farming organically here is very different from farming organically in Germany, for example. You can't superimpose the same methodology. So initially what we tried to do is we came to understand that we were farming with two things. We were farming with grapes, if I can put it that way, in the short term, but farming with soil in the long run. And you have to find a balancing act. And it's a difficult act to balance, because if sustainability is a three-legged chair, you have to sort of look after people, and you have to look after nature, but you also have to look after money. And it's sad, but it's true that we can exploit nature the longest and get away with it, and people the second longest. But the moment you run out of money, the business kind of grinds to a halt. So what we did is we took a long-term view, and we had certain objectives that we aimed for, but we would err on the side of caution. So in really dry years, we would have to, be a bit more careful in terms of yield management and things like that. But in years where we had plentiful rain, we could really afford to build the soil. So the cover crops played an important role. Initially, when we transitioned from conventional to organic, the soil life was really limited. The humus levels were really low. The soils are very old, and the vines really struggled, and my yields almost dropped to unsustainable. Well, not almost, they completely dropped to unsustainable levels. So in that phase, we sowed and planted a lot of legumes, things that have the ability to fix nitrogen and put it in the soil. So clovers and beans and peas and veg and ceradella and medics and stuff. And then over time, we started to plant more grains, because if you plant oats or rye or triticale or something like that, it's a much more fibrous plant. There's a lot more organic matter, a lot more material for the microbes to convert to humus. So at the moment, I would say our ratio would probably be about 60-40, 70-30, in terms of 60 or 70% would be grains and 30 or 40% would be legumes. But because we don't use any herbicides on the farm, there are a lot of wild plants and herbs and things that come up naturally. It's also very interesting to see how they've evolved over time. So initially, when we did the conversion, the soil was really hard and compact, and people had been using aggressive herbicides and stuff, and the weeds that came were really gnarly and hard and robust pioneer plants to try and reclaim the space. A lot of weeds with proper tap roots, like dandelions and things like that, to try and break that hard soil down. But over the time, as the soil has improved, the weeds and the things that nature sent, if I can put it that way, have become a lot softer and easier to work with. So at the moment, if you go and stand in the vineyard, you're probably going to find about 11 different plant species per square meter. Some of them we've planted, some of them we've planted in previous years and they've just reseeded themselves. And some of them are just plants that nature sends, given the health of our soil and the process and the time that we're in. But I just want to agree with Kelly here. I always thought it was all about regenerative agriculture and what I like to call land caring, and building the soil and sequestering carbon and stuff like that. But I was told a funny, scary thought the other day, and that was, since the beginning of the 16th century, if you go from then until now, we've lost a third of all species on planet Earth due to how we as humans have lived and the whole industrialization of our existence. And in the area where I live in the Western Cape, currently there are 200 plant species that are being endangered through agriculture and viticulture, because on the slopes where you want to plant your vines, a lot of these endangered endemic plants also exist. So I think it's important to find a balance between land caring and also land sparing. And they're kind of funny in the way that they're both good for the planet, but in sequestering carbon for everyone and protecting biodiversity for everyone. But it also feeds back to the farm, because I think we've already mentioned how farming this way has improved our ability to farm here. But in terms of biodiversity, all the predator insects and stuff that we need to keep the pests at bay all live in these wild pockets of flowers and plants and pockets of wilderness on the farm as well. So one must sort of strike a balance, and the areas where you do farm regeneratively, and the areas where you don't, really take care of nature and look after it to the best of one's ability as well.
Yes, I think that's really important, Johan, and the scientists at Potsdam are telling us that actually the loss of biodiversity is a greater threat to human longevity than climate change. So that's a big problem, and I certainly understand that what you do and Kelly and Leisha are doing is helping to mitigate that problem as well. Leisha, can you tell us about your cover crops and forage?
Yes. Like Kelly and Johan said, we have different experiences. We used to plant, especially when we were planting new vineyards, definitely. But over time, we also wanted to have a more typical mosaic of the biodiversity. We wanted to be we wanted to have what was really typical from that region, and not only use plants that were obviously good for the vineyard, but try to see something that was more related to the identity of that particular place. And what we also noticed using the sheep, that was very curious, is that on vineyards where we didn't have, for example, clover planted, After the sheep were grazing in some vineyards that did have, because they have some digestive difficulties with some seeds, they make them travel. And so we started to notice that some of those different species were traveling with the sheep, and we were seeing results of that over the years. And that also contributed in a very natural way to enhance the biodiversity on the vineyards. And so we stopped planting. Of course, we will once it's necessary, because like Johan was saying, I think everything's about balance. We're not extreme, but we wanted to give the opportunity to see how the soil would respond. And also we had that very lucky participation of the sheep bringing all kinds of different things to the soil.
Yeah. Right. I'll just say our experience, because we're in a very wet area. We have quite a lot of rain here. And we've given up planting cover crops at all. I tried because I had specific problems I wanted to try and deal with. But we now have 20 to 30 natural crops per square meter. And what we're observing is that because those spontaneously generating plants are adapted to our region, the insects are adapted to them, and so they can find their food sources better. And so we're getting a much more diverse insect population at all. So it goes back to this virtuous circle that we've been developing. There are, let me just say, we have about 10 minutes left. And there are a number of questions that I'd like to have us see if we can address. One is about water use. And since I'm in a wet region, I want to ask about how water is handled in the vineyard, whether it's too little water or too much water. Kelly, do you want to start?
So we're in the worst drought in 1800 years in California. And so I wish you could send some of your water our way, Tom.
I do too. I'm afraid you're going to send us the need to produce food for the country.
But and obviously building up soil organic matter, soil carbon is important to increase the water holding capacity of your soils. But our drought is so severe now that it's the big part of that equation is you have to get water to start with for the soil to hold. And the rains have been so few and far between that it's I think we're basically pretty much completely dry. We do irrigate, and we have found that even in the drought, our irrigation levels are going down as our management practices continue to show benefits on the land. And so our vineyard is on a sloping hillside. So since in the 8 years that I've been in California working on this project, we've experienced the wettest year in recorded history, and now also the driest, the largest drought, the most significant drought in 1800 years. And through that all, we didn't lose any soil during the heavy rains because our ground was covered and our organic matter was decent. It wasn't actually great at that time, and it still has a long ways to go. But and we keep our soils covered throughout the year, either with plant residue and dung, or with living growing plants. And so I think that's pretty critical too. So I think kind of regardless of your situation, creating a high organic matters in your soil, whether you have a lot of rain or you don't have much rain, is critical. And I think that's something everybody here is doing. And I think that's probably one of the primary keys to addressing that water cycle.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question has to do with the need, with the learning curve. Let me put it that way. It's hard to find experienced shepherds, experienced rustlers, cattle rustlers in the world today. Can you comment on how you all learned to care for your critters? and what you do about veterinary care and all just the logistics of if in inexperienced situations. Johan, do you want to talk about that from your cow and duck experience?
Yeah, it's, I'd like to pick up there where Leisure explained how, it's the pasture and the sheep. It's not a linear process. The sheep kind of eventually out creating the pasture. And we find the same thing with our cows. Initially, you sort of plant stuff for them, but somehow nature works. And where they graze eventually becomes what they need to live off. What I would definitely go for would be what we call indigenous animals. So if you think of a typical European cow, they would be bred for beef or for milk. So you would go for an Angus or I don't know, Hereford or something like that. If you want to be a beef farmer, and you would go for a Jersey or a Frisian cow if you wanted to be a milk farmer. But here in South Africa, we have, as I mentioned, these cows called Nguni, and they are products of evolution. They were not bred to produce beef or milk. Obviously, they do have milk and they do have meat, but they've been selected by nature through evolution. They're incredibly resilient. They calve very easily. They're very, they have a natural high resistance against pests and disease that you find in our area. And that has really made it a lot easier to work with an animal that is suited to this specific place rather than to try and import an animal from elsewhere. So I think for me, that was the biggest learning curve, was to, take a step back and instead of trying to superimpose my views on nature, to almost allow it to work, and to stop fighting it and to let it, fight with me, if I can put it that way. So I'm a big believer in indigenous animals for a specific area. I think they play a vital role. And it also ties up with Kelly's concept of water conservation, because what the animals do through the humus they build is they reduce the runoff, and they do increase the water carrying capacity. But just as an interesting aside, we also farm on a slope, on a hill. And it's not just water quantity that counts, it's also water quality that is becoming increasingly important in agriculture. So we can have water from an irrigation scheme, but we found that the quality of the water that we've been getting over the years have kind of slipped a bit as human settlements have increased and that type of thing. So what we've done now is we've drawn these contours across our hill to harvest rains when we get them. We have a top dam and we have a lower dam. And then we'll float solar panels on the lower dam and use the sun to pump the water up to the top dam. But what we've also done is taken, if you visualize a contour on a slope, it's quite a bit of wasted land. It's like a 3-meter wide bottom wall of the contour. So we're trying to plant endemic plants on those contours as well. So they also then start to double up as wildlife corridors for the farm, almost like the people in the UK had the hedgerows in the old days. And that also seems to be important, because if you farm organically or biodynamically or regeneratively, or like everybody here farms, I think it's less aggressive than conventional, modern, industrialized agriculture. But to be honest, it's still farming, and it's still a bit more invasive and aggressive than wilderness. And the more, diverse an ecosystem, the more stable it becomes. So to have these strips of wilderness run through your farm tends to help. And like the other synergies that we spoke about, the animals and the crops, perhaps this is also an idea to harvest water. It will give you clean water. You won't waste water. And you can also use it as a corridor for wilderness across your farm as well. It was just an aside that I thought of when
in the United States, we call that key lime grazing. Leisha, do you have any other comments about the learning curve? I know that you all have an experienced shepherd looking after your flock.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think we've been fortunately saying the same things in a very different way, but we all agree that I think that at some point farming became or farmers became a bit arrogant, I'd say, and put aside many traditions and something that, you know, many generations have been doing. And I'm very young, so I can say I was very arrogant. And I remember thinking that all things my grandfather did was weird. And now we had a lot of different information and means to, you know, make things different. And I think that once we, you know, take a step back and try to understand why, like Johan was saying, there's a reason why that kind of cow performs better. There's a reason why these kind of sheep that have been, you know, been there for many generations producing a cheese. Oh my God, something popped up, which, okay. So I think that if we take a moment and try to you know, look back and see what brought us here, then we might take some valuable lessons. And with sheep, for us, it was a lot like that. So we just understood that they were very close to us. It was very easy to find the right kind of animal. It was a way that was helping us and also the community around us. It was also a way to keep traditions, to keep certain professions, such as a shepherd, that was becoming very, very scarce, because all the cheese producing companies were becoming very big and were not using this kind of method. So they were just having sheep being fed, and the sheep were no longer going through the fields and were no longer, you know, shepherds. So a lot of things were disappearing just because I think we were not looking at farming in a circular thing, as a circular thing. Yeah, we were thinking, I do wine, so I have to care about grapes. He does cheese, so he must care only about sheep milk. So once we started, you know, talking and doing the way that has been done for many, many years, it became easy to learn.
Thank you for that. That loss of our traditional identity, as we talked about when we met earlier, is really important. Kelly, you mentioned, I want to just take one more question from the audience. Kelly, you mentioned increases in soil organic matter in your vineyard as well. Have you calculated the amount of carbon dioxide that you've sequestered?
No, I have not done that. And in regards to carbon, I think it's critical and important, but it is not our focus. Our focus is biodiversity, because I think if we just focused on carbon, it would be a linear thinking. And the thing that I have calculated is that with every 1% increase in the soil organic matter, that is increasing our water holding capacity of the soil by about, I believe it's around 60 gallons per vine. So, and that's a pretty important number for us, but we haven't sat down and done the calculations of the CO2
carbon. I think for the water calculation, I think the standard measure is 20,000 gallons per acre.
It varies. Yeah, it varies between like 18 to 25, I think. Yeah.
For carbon, you can figure it out. I forget that somebody's calculated the conversion, but 1% soil organic matter is 0.6% soil organic carbon. A furrow slice, which is 6 inches deep over 1 acre, weighs 5 million pounds. So from that, you can calculate for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, you can figure out how much carbon and therefore how much carbon dioxide you're sequestering. Remember, you have to add the weight of the oxygen in too. So we're almost at the end, but let me just ask if you have a pearl or one piece of advice that you could offer each of our listeners and audience, and that you would like to see them if they're starting out and wanting to put animals in their vineyard. Let's start with you, Leisha. So the
Well,
response to the poll.
Yeah, well, I think I'm the only one who doesn't, who has a smaller production and who doesn't actually own the sheep and has like a sheep or animal business inside the company. So if there are any small producers thinking about how big of an investment it is and how much you have to, study and all, I would say to take a look around, talk to your neighbors, see how your problem can be someone's solution, and then the other way around. Try to think of it as something bigger than your business, and I think that you'll find many good solutions.
Johan?
I think the best advice I ever got was to surround myself with people who are better than I am at specific tasks. No one is good at everything. And, I think what I've been trying to do in our farming setup, there are different jobs, is to really look for people who have better capabilities than I have in every single one of those areas. And it really works. Otherwise, you kind of limit your business to your own ability. And there are amazingly astute and capable and competent people out there. One thing that I really learned from this as well, also credit to Leisha, is this concept of bringing culture into the consideration. I've always thought of, nature and biodiversity and regenerative agriculture, but I really like this idea of the community and preserving the cultural value of agriculture as well, because that's what we are. It's not agribusiness, it's agriculture. So that was also very cool. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Kelly?
So it's hard to beat those two suggestions, but one thing I would say is to start small. And if you can't run a flock of sheep if you can't take care of one. And so I would encourage people to start small and look around. There's people in your area who have expertise in some type of animal or poultry or something that would work well in your situation, and work with them, and keep it small to start with. I started with 3 sheep on a 1/4 acre. And so it's, and then you build the confidence to move forward.
Yes, very good advice. So I want to thank our audience for attending. I want to thank the 3 of you for being part of this. I've learned a lot, and you talk about learning from your neighbors. I think what I take away from this, and what I take away from you all, is that the commitment to restoring the ecosystem, to building biodiversity, to sequestering carbon, and to restoring the identity of our individual regions. Those are concepts that are bigger than any one of us. And we're committed to that cooperative activity to try and restore and create a better future for our children and grandchildren. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.